The day my own son told me to disappear, I realized just how far I'd fallen in his eyes. It was a Sunday morning in early spring, the kind of morning where the birds outside the kitchen window were loud enough to drown out the whir of the dishwasher. Daniel leaned against the counter, his golf shirt half tucked in, coffee mug dangling like he didn't have a care in the world. Beside him, Rachel scrolled through her phone, her nails tapping against the screen with sharp little clicks. I had just set down a plate of scrambled eggs when Rachel looked up and said, almost casually, "Maggie, you don't need to keep handing us your pension money anymore. We don't need it. You should just find somewhere else to go. Honestly, it'd be better if you weren't in the way." Daniel didn't argue. He didn't even flinch. He just sipped his coffee like this was a conversation about the weather. I stood there, spatula still in my hand, feeling the floor tilt under me. The words were cruel enough, but the ease with which they said them, that was the real knife. 2 years of living in their house, paying for the privilege, cooking their meals, folding their laundry, watching their kids, and now I was nothing more than an inconvenience. "Find somewhere else to go," Rachel repeated, her voice light but laced with venom. "We're doing just fine without you now. Just go, fade away, Maggie. Isn't that what old people do?" I expected my chest to cave in from the weight of it, but instead, something unexpected bubbled up inside me. Laughter. Soft at first, then sharper. Daniel and Rachel both froze, staring at me like I'd lost my mind. "Why are you laughing?" Daniel finally asked, setting down his mug. I looked them both straight in the eye, my hands no longer trembling. "Sweethearts," I said, the word as sharp as a shard of glass. "Did you even bother to read whose name is on that lottery ticket you've been bragging about?" The color drained from Rachel's face. Daniel's jaw slackened just enough for me to see the panic start to creep in. That was the moment I'd been waiting for, the moment they realized they might have made a fatal miscalculation. But let me take you back, so you can understand how we got to this delicious turning point. 3 weeks earlier, in Maplewood, Ohio, the mornings had been gray. The kind of gray that sinks into your bones and makes you wonder if the sun has abandoned you for good. Still, every Friday without fail, I walked down to Brooklyn Market on Main Street. Same routine I'd kept for 30 years, same numbers, same quiet prayer under my breath as the clerk handed me the slip. Those numbers weren't random, they were a map of my life. 7 for the day Edward and I married. 13 for the day Daniel was born. 24 for the years we lived in our first little white house with the blue shutters. 36 for the age I was when our daughter passed away, pain I still carry like a scar no one sees. And the Powerball number, 19, for the anniversary Edward and I celebrated just before his first cancer diagnosis. Every week, I tucked the ticket into my wallet right behind Edward's faded driver's license. A ritual, a memory, a habit of hope. I had no idea then that those simple slips of paper dismissed by most people as wasted money would one day turn into my weapon. And I had no idea that the family I had once bled for would become the very people I'd need to defend myself against. That gray March morning clung to me the whole walk back from Brooklyn Market. The sky pressed low, heavy with clouds, and the cold bit through my wool coat even though the calendar insisted spring had arrived. I carried the ticket in my pocket like it was just another slip of paper. But in my heart it felt heavier, weighted with 3 decades of whispered wishes and unspoken prayers. When I turned onto Oakwood Lane, the street of neat colonials and manicured hedges, I slowed in front of a pastel blue house. My house. The one Edward and I had painted ourselves 35 years ago. He'd insisted on the color. "It'll feel like waking up to a piece of the sky," he'd said, splattering his jeans with paint and laughing when I scolded him. Now strangers lived there, and they'd added gaudy shutters, the color of mustard. Edward would have hated it. I stood on the sidewalk for a long moment, staring until the sting in my eyes forced me to keep walking. By the time I reached Daniel and Rachel's home, a bigger, newer colonial, with its 3 bathrooms and sprawling granite kitchen, I'd tucked my memories back inside, hidden under a smile. That's how you survive sometimes. By folding your pain so neatly that no one sees the creases. Rachel's silver Mercedes was already in the driveway. Through the window, I caught a glimpse of her at the kitchen island, headset clipped in, probably lecturing a client, or gossiping with her sister. She liked to remind me often. I work from home, Maggie. It's not as easy as it looks. I never pointed out that her idea of work was mostly talking while I did the cooking and cleaning around her. When I stepped inside, the warmth of the house should have felt comforting, but instead it felt suffocating. My coat went on the hook in the laundry room, the same hook where Daniel once hung his Little League jerseys. My late husband Edward's work shirts had once dangled there too, smelling faintly of sawdust and aftershave. Now, it was just me, trying to find my place in a home that never truly welcomed me. "Is that you?" Rachel called, irritation curling around her words like smoke. "Just me," I answered, keeping my voice steady. The unspoken apology lodged in my throat. I'd learned that with her, even existing could feel like trespassing. I headed upstairs to the so-called guest room, though nothing about it ever felt mine. The pale beige walls, the furniture picked by Rachel's decorator, the closet half filled with holiday decorations. Every month, I handed over $1,200, nearly all of my Social Security check, for the privilege of sleeping there. It hadn't started this way. After Edward's funeral, when Daniel insisted I move in, he'd painted it like a kindness. "It's temporary, Mom. We'll take care of you." I wanted to believe him. I wanted to believe the boy I raised, the boy who used to build snow forts until his lips turned blue, was still in there somewhere. The first weeks were almost pleasant. I cooked their dinners, ironed Daniel's shirts, kept the house tidy. They said thank you, at first. But gratitude is a slippery thing. It erodes. By summer, it was Rachel handing me typed lists, dry cleaning pickups, grocery runs, forms for Sophie's dance class and Noah's soccer league. "It makes sense," she'd say, smiling that corporate smile. "You're home anyway." And because I was still raw with grief, because Edward's voice still echoed in my dreams, I nodded and did what was asked. Then came the money talk. Rachel spread a spreadsheet across the kitchen table like she was presenting quarterly earnings. Rent, utilities, food, miscellaneous expenses. My share totaled $1,200 exactly, just shy of my monthly check. I stared at the yellow highlighted numbers. "That seems high," I managed. "I'm only one person." Rachel's eyes glittered with a cold light. "But you're using the kitchen, the bathroom, the laundry. And when the kids are here, that's extra cost. It's only fair." Fair. That word stung more than any insult. Fair was me rocking Daniel to sleep with a fever, while Edward worked night shifts. Fair was Edward giving up promotion so he could be home for Little League games. Fair was 47 years of marriage, only to end up in a spare room paying rent to my own son. I signed the paper anyway, my hand trembling. What choice did I have? That night, alone in my room, I opened a notebook and started writing. Each check I handed over, each hour I spent watching Sophie and Noah, each load of laundry, each dinner prepared. Not for revenge at least, not then. For survival. For proof that I hadn't imagined the slow erosion of my dignity. I didn't know yet how important that notebook would become. At first, I told myself it was just temporary. Grief can make you believe lies if they sound soft enough. After Edward's funeral, I needed someone to hold on to. Daniel's invitation to stay with him and Rachel felt like a lifeline. But lifelines, I would learn, can also become leashes. The guest room had smelled of fresh paint and vanilla candles when I moved in. Rachel had fluffed the pillows and said brightly, "It'll be like having your own little hotel suite, Maggie." I wanted to believe her. And maybe she even wanted to believe herself at the time. But hotels don't ask you to vacuum the stairs 3 times a week. Hotels don't demand your entire pension check to keep the lights on. By the second month, the language in the house had shifted. "Would you mind picking up the kids?" Turned into, "You'll need to handle drop-off today. Can you watch them for an hour?" Turned into, "We booked a weekend trip. Sophie and Noah are all yours." Daniel's absence hurt more than Rachel's coldness. He had mastered the art of being elsewhere, at work, at the gym, in the garage, whenever Rachel pressed me into service. My son, who once begged me to bake chocolate chip cookies before every baseball game, now couldn't even look me in the eye when Rachel slid bills across the table. I kept my ledger anyway. At first, it was neat columns. Rent, 1, 200. Utilities, 250. Groceries, 300. Then I added hours. Childcare, 36 this month. Laundry, 28 loads. Meals cooked, 20. I tallied them not to shame myself but to remember. Because some days the gaslighting was so strong I began to wonder if maybe I was being dramatic. Maybe Rachel was right, maybe this was fair. But then I'd overhear her on the phone with her sister, voice low and smug. Honestly, it's perfect. We've got live-in help, and she pays us for it. The laughter that followed would coil in my gut like barbed wire. The real breaking point came at one of Rachel's dinner parties. I'd spent the entire day polishing silver, arranging flowers, preparing trays of appetizers. When her friends arrived, I greeted them with a smile, serving wine like some underpaid caterer. I was clearing glasses in the hallway when I caught Rachel's voice drifting from the living room. It's genius, really. Maggie covers her own costs, does the chores, babysits. It's like monetizing your mother-in-law. The women laughed. High, shrill, satisfied laughter. I froze with the tray in my hands, the stem of a half-full glass trembling against porcelain. In that moment, something in me crystallized. This wasn't temporary. This wasn't family helping family. This was a business arrangement dressed up in holiday sweaters and family photos. And I was the fool who'd signed the contract. That night, upstairs in the beige-walled room that wasn't mine, I pulled out my notebook and flipped back through the pages. The numbers stared up at me, stark and undeniable. $14,000 in rent so far, hundreds of unpaid hours logged. My stomach churned, but my hands were steady as I underlined one word in the margin. Exploitation. I didn't know it yet, but justice had already started moving toward me, as steady and inevitable as the winter snow. By November, the air outside was sharp enough to sting your lungs. Inside, the heat hummed steadily, but I never felt warm. Rachel called me into the dining room one afternoon. Her laptop open. Papers spread across the polished oak table like she was running a board meeting. Daniel sat nearby, fiddling with his phone, not meeting my eyes. Maggie, Rachel began in that carefully sweet tone she used when she thought she was being diplomatic. We've been thinking about ways to make you more comfortable. I almost laughed. Comfort was the last thing she cared about. But I waited. She turned the laptop toward me. On the screen were design sketches. A small basement apartment, complete with a kitchenette, a bathroom, and a separate entrance. We want to build you a suite downstairs. That way, you'll have privacy, your own space. Her voice glowed with false generosity. The basement? I asked slowly. Daniel cleared his throat. It's not like that, Mom. It's really nice down there. Warm in the winter, cool in the summer. I looked at the floor plans again. Small square windows barely above ground, cabinets marked budget option. A fridge the size of a college dorm unit. Privacy, sure, but the kind of privacy people give to things they want out of sight. What if I don't want to move to the basement? I asked. My voice quiet but steady. Rachel's smile tightened. Well, we've been feeling like we need our space back as a couple. This is the solution that works for everyone. And if I prefer to find another place? I pressed. The silence stretched. Daniel shifted uncomfortably. We'd understand, he said at last. His voice was careful, measured, the way people speak when they know the knife they're holding has just slipped a little too far. I excused myself before they could see the flush of humiliation creeping up my neck. Upstairs, in the guest room that had cost me $1,200 every month, I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the beige wall. They wanted me underground, out of sight, a burden to be contained, not a mother to be cherished. That night, I dreamed of Edward. He stood by our old blue house, shaking his head, paintbrush in hand. Don't let them bury you, Maggie, he said. You're worth more than this. When I woke, his words lingered like smoke in my lungs. Friday came, bitter and snowy. I wrapped my scarf tight and walked the 2 blocks to Brooklyn Market. Calvin, the clerk, smiled as always. Same numbers, Mrs. Collins? I nodded, handing over my $5 bill. The printer whirred, spitting out the slip. My fingers brushed the ink, tracing the numbers like old friends. 7, 13, 24, 36, 19. Memories stitched to each one our wedding day. Daniel's birth. Years in the little house. The age I was when grief nearly swallowed me. And the last anniversary before Edward's diagnosis. Numbers that carried both love and loss, now waiting to be transformed. "Good luck this week," Calvin said cheerfully. I tucked the ticket into my wallet, behind Edward's license, like always. Only this time, my prayer wasn't just for luck. It was for justice. The wind whipped hard against my face as I stepped back into the snow, but I hardly felt the cold. I had no idea just how close justice already was. Friday night, I sat propped against pillows in the guest room, the hum of the furnace filling the silence. On the TV, the local anchor's voice carried through the room as the lottery numbers rolled across the screen. Tonight's winning numbers are 7, 13, 24, 36, and the Powerball is 19. To this top, for a moment, my brain refused to process what I'd just heard. I blinked at the screen, replayed it in my mind, and then snatched my wallet off the nightstand. My fingers trembled as I pulled out the slip of paper. There they were printed in neat black ink. My numbers, my life, my win. $48 million. I sat frozen, the ticket pressed against my chest. Edward's faded driver's license peeked from the slot behind it, his photo smudged from years of handling. I whispered his name, tears sliding down my cheeks. "We did it, Ed. We finally did it." The first wave was disbelief. The second was gratitude. But then a third came barreling in. Fear. Because I knew exactly what would happen if Rachel and Daniel found out too soon. They'd claim it as theirs. They'd plan vacations, cars, maybe even that basement suite upgraded to a luxury retirement community. And I would be written off, once again, as the dependent old woman. Not this time. I wiped my eyes and set to work. First, I pulled out my phone and snapped photos of the ticket front and back. Then I attached them to an email addressed to my lawyer, Mr. Stanton, with the subject line, "For safekeeping." I sent another copy to a church friend, Ellen, who had always been a quiet ally. 2 time-stamped witnesses, digital and real. Next, I tucked the original ticket into an envelope and slid it into Edward's old toolbox in the attic, the one Daniel never bothered with, full of rusty wrenches and paint-stained brushes. If anyone was going to snoop, that's the last place they'd look. I lay awake the entire night, heart pounding with a strange cocktail of terror and exhilaration. The numbers that had once been a ritual of hope were now my lifeline, my key to freedom. By dawn, I had a plan forming. Careful steps, no sudden moves. I'd play the dutiful mother-in-law until I had the prize in hand, then vanish into independence. But the universe has a wicked sense of humor. The very next morning, as Sophie and Noah argued over cartoons in the living room, Rachel decided to clean the kitchen. I was buttering toast when I heard the shuffle of papers, then her sharp intake of breath. "Where did you get this?" Her voice trembled. I turned. She was holding the lottery ticket I'd forgotten to re-hide after copying the numbers into my notebook. My stomach dropped. "I buy one every week," I said evenly. "Same numbers, 30 years now." Rachel's eyes darted to her phone. Her fingers flew across the screen. "Daniel, get in here, now." My son stumbled in, hair mussed, half-buttoned shirt. "What's wrong?" Rachel thrust the ticket at him, her hand shaking. "Look at this. Look at the numbers." Daniel's eyes flicked from the paper to her phone screen, his face drained of color. "Oh my God," he whispered. The room spun with their shock, their disbelief. And I, standing there with butter knife in hand, realized the storm I'd feared had just arrived. Daniel stood frozen in the doorway, the ticket trembling in his hand. His lips moved, forming numbers under his breath, as if saying them aloud might change them. Rachel paced the kitchen like a caged animal, her phone pressed to her chest, eyes wide with a greedy light I'd seen before when she found a designer bag on clearance, when she bragged about snagging a deal on a luxury vacation. "Oh my God, Maggie," she said, voice breathless. "This changes everything. We don't have to worry anymore. We can finally get the house we deserve. We can." I cut her off. "You mean you don't have to worry anymore?" She blinked, caught off guard, but quickly recovered. "Well, of course, we're all in this together. We're family. We'll take care of you." The way she said take care made my skin crawl. Daniel, still staring at the ticket, finally spoke. We need to call a lawyer, a financial planner, maybe even a PR person. We can't let this get out. Rachel snapped her fingers, excitement building. And forget the basement suite. With this kind of money, we can buy a house with a proper wing for you. Or oh, one of those exclusive senior communities. The ones with activities and medical care. You'd love it there, Maggie. You'd have friends. There it was, the shiny way of saying, we can finally get rid of you. I leaned against the counter, watching the two of them spin fantasies out of paper and ink. Their voices grew louder, overlapping vacations, renovations, new cars, college funds. Not once did they say my name with reverence, or gratitude, or love. I was just a footnote in their dream life. I let them go on for a while. It was almost amusing, watching them build castles in the air. Then, when Rachel said, we'll need to set aside enough for Daniel's business ideas too, I cleared my throat. Both heads turned. There's one small detail we should probably get straight, I said softly, calmly, as if we were discussing the weather. Daniel frowned. What detail? I held out my hand. The ticket, give it here. He hesitated, then placed it in my palm. The paper was warm from his fingers, but when it touched mine, it felt like steel. I folded it neatly, tucked it into my pocket, and looked at them with a steady gaze. This, I said, tapping my pocket, is in my name. I bought it, with my money, with the same numbers I've played for 30 years. Which means it belongs to me. Silence. Rachel's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. Her face flushed crimson, then pale, then something in between. Daniel rubbed the back of his neck, his jaw tightening. But we're family, Rachel sputtered at last. We share everything. I smiled, not sweetly, not kindly, but with a sharpness I hadn't felt in years. No. What we've shared is me paying you $1,200 every month to live in your guest room. Me cooking, cleaning, babysitting for free. Me listening to you laugh about how you've monetized me. Daniel shifted, guilt flickering in his eyes, but Rachel plowed ahead. You can't handle this kind of money on your own. It's too complicated. People your age get scammed all the time. You need us. I straightened, feeling taller than I had in years. Need you. Rachel. Darling. The only thing I need is fresh air and a life without your thumb pressing on me. Her eyes narrowed. You wouldn't really walk away, not after everything we've done for you. That was the moment I laughed. A low, steady laugh that sent a shiver across the room. You have no idea, I said, my voice almost a whisper, what I'm about to do next. The news vans came faster than I ever imagined. By Sunday afternoon, 3 of them lined the curb outside Daniel and Rachel's house, their antennas rising like metal weeds against the sky. Neighbors peeked through curtains, some stepping onto porches with folded arms, pretending to fetch the mail but clearly waiting for a show. Inside, Rachel was in full crisis mode, her hair curled perfectly, lipstick freshly applied. Every time a knock came at the door, she sprang up to answer with her brightest smile. Mrs. Collins isn't available right now, she cooed to one reporter, but as her family, we're just so thrilled to share in this blessing. Our blessing, she kept saying, as if the universe had wired the winnings directly into their joint account. Daniel hovered behind her, rehearsing lines in his head. I could see it in the way his lips moved silently. We're supporting her, she's safe with us, we're a close family. Lies polished into PR soundbites. I stood at the top of the stairs, clutching the banister, listening to the circus downstairs. Part of me wanted to hide. Another part, the stronger part, wanted to end this charade. When the third reporter asked through the open door, "Is Mrs. Collins here? Does she have any comment?" I stepped forward. My voice, though quiet, carried across the foyer. "Yes, she does." Rachel spun, eyes wide. "Maggie, don't." But I was already walking down the steps, each footfall steadier than the last. My heart pounded, but it wasn't fear. It was something closer to liberation. The cameras swung toward me, microphones thrust forward. "Mrs. Collins, how does it feel to win $48 million? What are your plans?" I paused on the porch, the cold air biting my cheeks. Behind me, I felt Rachel's hand hovering like she wanted to drag me back inside. Daniel loomed just behind her, jaw clenched. I looked out at the reporters, at the neighbors watching from across the street, at the strangers leaning from car windows. And then I spoke. "I feel grateful," I said, steady and clear. "Grateful for the chance to live independently again. For too long, I've been made to feel like a burden in my own family. I've paid $1,200 a month to live in a guest room while cooking, cleaning, and caring for children without a word of thanks. I've been told to move into a basement so I wouldn't be in the way." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Rachel hissed behind me. "What are you doing?" I ignored her. Family should be about love, respect, and care, not about extracting money or free labor. Today, I have the means to choose differently. And I will. The microphones pushed closer. "Are you saying your son and daughter-in-law exploited you?" one reporter asked bluntly. I looked straight into the nearest camera. "I'm saying that no one, no mother, no father, no grandparent, should ever be treated like hired help in their children's homes. It's never too late to stand up for yourself." Behind me, I heard Rachel's sharp inhale, felt Daniel's shame settle like a weight in the doorway. But it was too late. The words were already out, already caught by every microphone and camera lens. I turned, walked down the steps, and slid into my car. As I pulled away, I caught one last glimpse in the rearview mirror. Rachel on the porch, her smile cracking under the weight of exposure, Daniel's face pale and hollow. For the first time in years, I felt free. The media circus swirled for days. My phone buzzed endlessly, friends I hadn't spoken to in years, distant cousins suddenly eager to catch up, even church acquaintances who never remembered my birthday. Everyone had something to say. Everyone had advice. But the only voice I trusted was Edward's, echoing in my mind. "Maggie, when the storm comes, you'll know who's shelter and who's thunder." On Monday morning, I drove to Stanton, Brooks Law. The office sat in a modest brick building on the corner of Maple and 3rd. Nothing fancy, but I'd walked through those doors a dozen times with Edward, back when we were sorting wills and insurance. Mr. Stanton, tall, balding, spectacles forever sliding down his nose, greeted me with the same warm handshake he'd offered Edward 30 years ago. "Congratulations, Maggie," he said as he ushered me into his office. Edward would be proud. I swallowed hard. I wish he were here to see it. We sat at his oak desk, papers stacked in tidy towers, a brass lamp casting golden light. He adjusted his glasses and leaned forward. "Let's start with the practical. I strongly recommend you take the annuity option. It keeps taxes manageable, ensures a steady income stream. We'll also establish a trust, keep things protected from, shall we say, opportunistic family members." "Opportunistic is one word for them," I muttered. He smiled sympathetically. "I've seen this story more times than I care to admit. Money doesn't change character, it reveals it." For the next hour, we mapped logistics, trust accounts, durable powers of attorney, plans to keep the money safe. I scribbled notes in the little ledger I'd carried since Rachel first charged me rent. But as the meeting wrapped, Mr. Stanton grew quiet. He opened a file drawer, pulled out a thick manila folder, and placed it gently on the desk. "There's something else," he said. "Something Edward left in my care. He instructed me to share it only if your family ever tried to take advantage of you financially." My breath caught. "He knew?" Mr. Stanton nodded. Edward was perceptive. About 6 months before he passed, he hired a private investigator. He had suspicions about Daniel and Rachel. My hands trembled as I opened the folder. Inside were pages of statements, credit reports, photographs. Rachel's boutique business, hemorrhaging money for nearly a year. Daniel's credit card balances stacked sky-high $42,000 spread across 6 accounts. A mortgage underwater by nearly $30,000. 2 car loans, both delinquent. Even a second mortgage on their house they hadn't mentioned to anyone. I stared at the numbers until they blurred. My heart sank, not because I didn't believe it, but because Edward had seen it coming long before I did. He'd tried to warn me, in his own way. "There's also this," Stanton said softly, sliding over another envelope. Edward took out a life insurance policy, a private trust, $400,000 payable directly to you. It's been accruing interest since the day he died. Tears welled, hot and sudden. Edward had been gone 2 years. And yet here he was, protecting me still. He knew, I whispered. He knew they'd use me. This note didn't pass it. One was note in Marmon's. Stanton leaned back, folding his hands. The question is, what do you want to do with this information? You could keep it private, or you could use it. I looked at the folder again, the receipts, the debts, the truth laid bare in black and white. For months, I'd been told I was overreacting, dramatic, a burden. Now, I had proof. Cold, hard proof. I want a meeting, I said, my voice steady despite the tears on my cheeks. A family meeting, tonight. I want them to see it all. And I want them to know I won't be their safety net ever again. Mr. Stanton nodded slowly, a flicker of admiration in his eyes. Then let's prepare. By 7 that evening, the living room lights glowed warm, but the air felt colder than any winter night. I'd set the coffee table with folders, papers, and my worn ledger, everything neatly arranged like evidence in a courtroom. My pulse beat steady, not from fear but from resolve. Rachel arrived first, laptop bag slung over her shoulder, her heels clicking sharp against the hardwood. She gave me a smile so polished it could have been carved from glass. Maggie, I know Sunday was dramatic, she began, pulling her laptop out. But Daniel and I have put together some ideas. Statistics show 70% of lottery winners go bankrupt within 5 years. It's terrifying. You need us to guide you. Daniel followed close behind, a conciliatory bottle of wine in hand. Mom, let's just talk things through calmly, okay? I nodded, gesturing toward the couch. That's exactly what we're going to do. Rachel clicked open her binder, spreadsheets and graphs lined up like soldiers. Here's how we can structure the winnings: safe investments, real estate, college funds. If you let us manage— Before we talk about my security, I interrupted softly, sliding a folder across the table. We need to talk about yours. The change in the room was instant. Daniel frowned. Rachel's hand hesitated on the trackpad. What is this? Rachel asked, her voice sharp. Your reality, I replied. Inside the folder were copies from Stanton's file, credit reports, business losses, mortgage statements. Daniel paled, the bottle of wine dangling forgotten from his hand. You owe $42,000 in credit card debt, I recited, my tone calm, almost clinical. Your mortgage is underwater by nearly 30. 2 car loans, both behind on payments. And Rachel, your boutique has been running at a loss for 10 months. Daniel sank into the couch, hands in his hair. Rachel's eyes narrowed. How dare you invade our privacy? The same way you invaded mine, I said evenly. When you decided I was too incompetent to handle a lottery ticket I bought with my own money. Silence pressed heavy over the room. Only the tick of the mantel clock filled the air. I opened my ledger next, the pages filled with tidy notes. Over the past year, I've paid you $14,400 in rent. I've logged more than 1,000 hours of childcare. 800 loads of laundry, 300 meals. I've kept receipts, Rachel. Every penny, every hour. You didn't give me a home. You ran a business. And I was your employee. No, your exploited employee. Rachel's face reddened, her polished composure cracking. That's not fair. I raised my hand. Do not use that word with me. Fair would have been treating me as family, not as revenue. Daniel whispered, Mom, we were just trying to make it work. We needed help. And you thought I was too old, too tired, too desperate to notice, I said. But Edward noticed. He left me a trust. He left me protection. And he left me proof of exactly who you are. Rachel's laptop screen dimmed to black as her fingers hovered uselessly. Daniel stared at the carpet, his shoulders slumped. I closed the ledger with a decisive snap. I'm moving out this week. I've already signed a lease at Meadowbrook Senior Living. A 2-bedroom, full kitchen, balcony. Costs less than what you charged me for this guest room. Rachel's eyes widened. You can't just leave. Yes, I can, I said, standing. And I will. I'm done being your safety net. The clock chimed the half hour. The sound echoed in the silence that followed, a funeral bell for the arrangement they thought would last forever. 2 days later, I slid the final box into the back of my car. It wasn't much, just clothes, some books, Edward's old toolbox, and my notebook of receipts. Funny how a lifetime can shrink down to a few cardboard boxes when you've been living as someone else's afterthought. Meadowbrook Senior Living wasn't extravagant, but to me, it felt like a palace. The building was brick and ivy, with big windows that caught the morning sun. My new apartment sat on the third floor, 2 bedrooms, a balcony overlooking the garden, a kitchen where I could finally cook for myself without anyone hovering. When I turned the key for the first time, the door creaked open, and the smell of fresh paint hit me. It was mine, all mine. The first night, I unpacked slowly, savoring each act. Books on a shelf. Edward's driver's license tucked into the nightstand. A fern on the balcony. For the first time in years, I didn't have to tiptoe. I didn't have to apologize for existing. I could breathe. The next morning, I joined the community's coffee social. A cluster of retirees sat around tables in the common room, mugs in hand, laughter spilling over the hum of a percolator. I slid into a chair, nervous, but was greeted with smiles. "You must be the new neighbor," said a woman with cropped silver hair. "I'm Marlene." I smiled back. "Maggie." Within minutes, I was being invited to bingo night, ceramics class, even the walking club. They weren't looking for rent money or free childcare. They just wanted company. Meanwhile, back at Daniel and Rachel's, the cracks spread quickly. I knew because people talked Maplewood was a small town, and gossip traveled faster than the evening news. Rachel lost her biggest client after one of them saw my interview on TV. "I don't do business with people who exploit their own family," the client reportedly told her before pulling the account. Daniel didn't fare much better. His manager called him into the office after whispers about the lottery spread around town. "A man who treats his mother like that doesn't have judgment I can trust," the manager said, rescinding a promised promotion. Their perfect suburban image was unraveling, thread by thread. At Meadowbrook, I found myself growing stronger every day. I started a small writing group with 3 other women, each of us sharing memories, laughing at mistakes, crying when the past still cut too deep. We called ourselves the Late Bloomers. One afternoon, as sunlight poured across my balcony, I realized something. This wasn't just survival. This was rebirth. And it was only the beginning. Because while I was finding my footing in a community that valued me, Daniel and Rachel were stumbling into the collapse they had sown themselves. By early summer, Maplewood had stopped whispering and started pointing. Neighbors who once envied Rachel's Mercedes and Daniel's spotless lawn now smirked as weeds crept up their walkway. The shine was gone. It started with the bank notices. A foreclosure letter slipped into their mailbox. Bright red stamp screaming final warning. I heard about it from Marlene's nephew, who worked at the post office. Word spread fast in a town this size. Then came the car. The Mercedes vanished from their driveway one morning, repossessed before Rachel had even finished her first cup of coffee. She tried to pass it off as getting an upgrade, but no one bought it. Her boutique, once a darling of local magazines, shuttered quietly. A note taped to the glass door read, "Closed until further notice." Everyone knew further notice meant forever. Daniel didn't escape the fallout either. His boss at the firm called him in, stern-faced, after reading the article about me in the Maplewood Gazette. It quoted my exact words on the porch. "Family should be about love, not business arrangements." The article didn't mention names, but everyone in town knew. Daniel's promotion was postponed indefinitely. Within weeks, he was reduced to basic assignments, his colleagues side-eyeing him in the break room. Their social circle shrank too. The very friends who'd laughed at Rachel's dinner parties stopped returning her calls. At church, people avoided eye contact. At the grocery store, whispers followed them down the aisle. "That's the couple who charged his mother rent. Imagine making her live in the basement." It was Rachel who cracked first. She showed up at Meadowbrook one humid evening, mascara streaking her cheeks, her hands clutching a folder of unpaid bills. "Maggie, please," she begged in the lobby, ignoring the curious stares of my neighbors. "You don't understand. We're drowning. Daniel's stressed. The kids are confused. We need help, alone, just until we get back on our feet." I looked at her carefully. This was the same woman who once told me I should be grateful for having a basement to move into. The same woman who counted my pension check before I could. "You want help?" I asked softly. "Yes," she whispered. We're family. I thought of Edward, of the folder he'd left with Mr. Stanton. I thought of my ledger, of every dime and hour they'd taken. And I thought of Sophie and Noah, the only innocents in this mess. You'll get help, I said at last. Her face lit up, but not the way you think. 2 days later, Daniel and Rachel walked into Stanton Brooks Law with the look of cornered animals. Rachel clutched that same folder of bills, her nails chipped from stress. Daniel kept wringing his hands, eyes darting around like he was bracing for bad news. Mr. Stanton greeted them politely, then stepped aside as I rose from my chair. For once, I didn't feel small in their presence. I felt steady. Rachel tried to start first. Maggie, we're desperate. If you could just lend us enough to cover the mortgage. I held up my hand. No, this isn't about bailing you out. It's about setting boundaries. Daniel frowned. Boundaries? I slid a packet of papers across the table. Here are the terms. Non-negotiable. Rachel snatched the packet, scanning quickly. Her face went pale. Condition 1. Sell the house. Downsize to something you can afford. Condition 2. Financial counseling for 6 months. Proof of attendance required. Condition 3. No more luxury cars. The next vehicle you buy must be within your means. Condition 4. Set up college savings accounts for Sophie and Noah. I'll match your contributions dollar for dollar, but only if they come from your income, not mine. Condition 5. You will never, under any circumstance, access my funds, ask me to co-sign, or manage my finances. Ever. Rachel slammed the packet shut. This is humiliating. This is accountability, I replied calmly. Daniel's voice cracked. Mom, please. We can't just. You can, I said firmly. You'll adapt. The same way I adapted when your father died, and I had to start over at 67. The same way I adapted when you and Rachel charged me $1,200 a month to live in your guest room. Rachel opened her mouth, then shut it again. Mr. Stanton cleared his throat. If you accept the terms, Mrs. Collins is prepared to make one contribution. A one-time payment toward your highest interest debt, released only after proof of the house sale and counseling sessions. Otherwise, you walk away with nothing. The room went still. Rachel's jaw clenched, but she nodded. Daniel buried his face in his hands. I rose, tucking my papers into my bag. This isn't revenge, I said softly. This is justice, and justice means protecting the grandchildren from your mistakes, while refusing to carry the weight of them myself. Weeks later, the for sale sign went up in front of their Colonial. The Mercedes was gone, replaced by a modest sedan. Sophie and Noah visited me at Meadowbrook, their laughter filling my little apartment as they helped me water the fern on the balcony. One evening, Mr. Stanton handed me a sealed envelope. Edward left you a letter, he said. I unfolded it with trembling hands. Edward's handwriting was shaky but still familiar. Maggie, if you're reading this, it means you had the courage I always knew you carried. Don't let them bury you in basements or bind you with guilt. You are stronger than they realize. Justice delayed is not justice denied, it's justice arriving at the perfect time. Live free, my love. Always. Tears blurred the words, but my heart felt lighter than it had in years. At the next community gathering, I shared my story, not the lottery part, but the part about boundaries, exploitation, and self-respect. I held up my notebook, the one filled with receipts, hours, numbers. Write it down, I told them. Your work, your worth. Because someday, you might need proof that you were never a burden, you were a giver. And no one has the right to twist that. The room erupted in applause. For once, I wasn't invisible. I was heard. As I walked back to my apartment, the evening sun poured golden through the garden. I placed Edward's letter on the nightstand, beside his license and the lottery slip now locked away in a safe. Finally, I was free.